So today I wanted to talk about the collapse of the Inca Empire. Now before that, a brief history. Basically, the Inca Empire was the largest pre-colonial nation in America. It consisted of what would be called the four suyos. These would basically be like the four provinces of the empire. It was a hereditary monarchy, and it was incredibly authoritarian and centralized. The Inca had an immense amount of power in the empire. As an example of this, if you wanted to plant a certain crop, you had to ask the Inca, and the Inca would tell you which crop to plant, and he would send someone to give you the seeds to plant said crop. Now, this worked great in the beginning stages when the Inca Empire was smaller. However, as the empire started growing, the Incas needed a faster way to communicate and relay the messages that the Incas sent. So they created the Inca roads, which were a vast system of interconnected roads by which the Inca could send armies or whatever he wanted across them. Now, these weren't open to the public. However, these basically connected most cities to Cusco, which was the capital. From Cusco, the Inca Empire rose. It was originally dominated by another tribe nearby, or city-state, called the Chanca. However, the Inca Pachacuti managed to win a battle. There are legends of how he won. However, he managed to win it by toppling the other tribe's mummy over, because they carried the mummy into battle, and he managed to topple it. And as the mummy fell, the warriors lost their fighting spirit and run away. The Inca Empire had a common practice called reciprocity, which was basically once they fought a battle, the Inca would gather all the loot and give them back to the caciques, which were lower ranking nobles that would manage a city. It would be like a European count per se, or a duke. And then they would share the loot. These also worked in peacetime, as the Inca would first ask for workers from said tribes, and the caciques would send them, and then the Inca would send back workers when the cacique needed them. A couple more important facts about the Inca Empire was that first, they had no currency, at least that we know of. They had no writing. They didn't have a form of quipu system, which we still don't understand till this day. It's basically a bunch of knots tied to a bunch of strings, and we don't understand them, but we think that these are used for numbers. So certain knots means certain amounts of different things. And they also didn't have wheels or beasts of burden. They didn't have horses, they just had llamas. The Inca Empire quickly began expanding. They had two main avenues of expansion, or two main tactics to expanding. The first one, which was the preferred method, was intermarriages. The Inca would take the daughter of a cacique, and he would marry her and produce children with her. In return, these regions would incorporate. And the other method, which was most often used, however it wasn't preferred, was conquest. They just go, fight a battle, and then siege out the city, and then they'll incorporate it violently into the empire. They had a couple of practices for incorporating these regions. They mostly and mainly grabbed the younger members. I don't know if this means the children or if these means like the young adults, and they would send them to other regions of the empire. And this would ensure that the empire had different skills, and this would also ensure, or would at least try, to break the ties that these people had with their homelands, and thus incorporate faster into the empire. And finally, the Inca Empire was mostly monogamous. However, the Inca was allowed to have more than one wife. He would have children with these other wives, and all of these could become heir to the empire. That's why when he went to a village and he offered to marry them, most of the time they said all right, because they wanted, or they thought they could make it so that if the Inca had an heir with his daughter, then the heir would be favorable to the village, and thus ensuring that they would prosper further. Now, the Inca Empire started quickly expanding, very rapidly. We don't know what gave them the edge, or at least I don't know what gave them the edge, but they pretty quickly started crushing their enemies. And they basically had the entire region uncontested. So once the Europeans under Columbus discovered the Americas, the Incan Empire had basic hegemony. They still had a number of states and regions that had not been incorporated into the empire and were still independent. Now, the Europeans had brought with them several diseases. These diseases would start spreading like wildfire as the Indians or the Native Americans didn't have any immunity to these diseases. So, by the time that the disease arrived into the Inca Empire, via by trade or by simple migrations, the Incas had finally managed to unify the region. The Inca at the time, which was Manco Capac, had been sieging Quito, and once he laid siege, and once the siege was over, the Incan Empire had finally managed to conquer all of the tribes in the area. And just as the siege fell, or shortly after the siege fell, he caught the disease, and he went further inland into the mountains, and he died. Now, his heir, which was one of his sons, also died, and the following heir, which was his brother, died as well. So now the Inca Empire had no leader, and as you recall, the Inca Empire was incredibly centralized. So they needed a new leader, and they needed him urgently. And there were two main candidates. There were Atahualpa and Huáscar, both sons of the previous Inca, and both were immensely popular. Huáscar seemed to have been more popular in the north and Atahualpa in the south. However, this is not entirely concrete, as we don't have a lot of information, as the Incas did not write anything down. So Huáscar and Atahualpa met up and started talking and coming to an accord. They said, all right, let's work together and let's be friends. Actually, I have an even better idea. What if instead of being friends, why don't we just kill each other? The battles weren't the main thing that harmed the Incas. It was the Incas' proper repression techniques. So Atahualpa captured Huáscar after a battle, and he tied him to a tree trunk and made Splash Mountain look like a joyride as he threw his brother down a river. Now, Atahualpa, with the power secure, he started to completely establish himself as the Inca. And the way he did this was with suppression along the entire north, where Huáscar had been incredibly popular with the caciques. He started pillaging and suppressing relatively harshly the north of the empire. Whilst he was trying to do this, the Europeans, being the Spanish in this case, had managed to land in Panama. And they had heard by the local villages that there was an empire down south that was incredibly wealthy. This was, of course, the Incan Empire, and the Spanish started doing voyages and expeditions towards the south, where they knew the Incan Empire was. Now, Pizarro had done several expeditions before. His fourth one finally reached the north of Peru, where he landed and established an outpost as he would start getting reinforcement from Panama. There he started communicating and trading with the local villagers, where they started telling him about the Inca's repression. Now, the Inca realized that there were a bunch of Spanish squatting in his lands. That's somewhat when they both agreed to meet up in Cajamarca. Now, it's not certain who asked for the meetup to occur. It could have been Pizarro, which is most likely, or it could have been the Inca. However, what eventually happened is that Pizarro set off with a couple hundred men, of which 60-something were cavalry, and he had 2 cannons and 3 arquebusiers, to meet off with the Inca, who had 6,000 men with him, including 12 royal guards. Now, Pizarro probably wanted the Inca to view or accept the King of Spain as his liege, or to become a tributary of the King of Spain, and to adopt Catholicism. This would have been Pizarro's ideal objective. However, he would have settled for capturing him and receiving a ransom. Now, as to what the Inca himself wanted, it's speculated, because we don't have any concrete information, that the Inca wanted to capture a couple of Pizarro's men, mainly the a Catholic missionary had gone with them, and the armorer. And then he possibly wanted to kill the rest of the Spaniards or something. We don't really know. However, once the encounter started, two things happened. First, Pizarro asked the Inca if he would become a tributary of the King of Spain, to which the Inca supposedly replied that he would become the tributary of no man. And second, the Catholic missionary handed the Inca the Bible, and he told him, "This is the word of God." And the Inca grabbed the book, put it to his ear, and said, "I can't hear anything," and threw the book away. Now, after all this happened, the Inca got captured. We don't know explicitly how. And the two armies clashed for 3 hours at most, and then the Incan army was routed. The Inca got captured, and Pizarro basically told him, "I want a ransom." And the Inca, who supposedly was pretty tall, told him, "All right, I'll give you a room of my height of gold and 2 rooms of my height of silver." To which Pizarro said, "All right." However, the Inca was also tried for murder of his brother, and he was found guilty. And as such, the Inca was executed for murder. And so the ransom wasn't paid, and supposedly the ransom found its way onto the bottom of a river or a lake. We don't know where or if it's still there. Now, the Spanish had the task of securing the state, securing the region, which was quickly becoming unmanageable for the empire itself, as the Inca was no longer alive and the region started splitting off. So Pizarro grouped all of the caciques together and forced them or coerced them into accepting another of Atahualpa's brothers as the new Inca, which they all did. And Pizarro continued this practice a couple of times. By the second Inca that he nominated escaped and formed his own state near the mountains and the jungle near the capital. However, the state was nothing major, and it was eventually crushed by the Spanish. This practice would eventually fall out of favor, and the lands of the Inca Empire would be incorporated into the Viceroyalty of Peru, which, when the Bourbon reforms came, would eventually be split up further, and then split up further once the states became independent. Now, the final topic I want to talk about is the amount of wealth that the Incan Empire's lands brought to the Spanish crown. With all these mines of gold and silver that they acquired from the New World mines in Peru and Bolivia and northern Chile and Ecuador, they made the Spanish Empire what it became in those centuries. Spain would have not had nearly as much power without those lands, without the amount of gold, and their immense colonial empire was fueled in part by the conquest of the Inca Empire. I would have wondered what would have happened if the Incas had managed to stay independent and keep their gold and use it as they see fit. Obviously, it would have been an immense change for them, as they would have started adopting writing, currency, would have had to deal with Europeans who wanted a lot of the gold, and possibly would have had to start trading or would have had to start defending themselves. The Incan Empire would have had to incredibly transform in the next 100 years if it wanted to survive. And that's what I've always wondered, is what if they actually managed to survive? What would have become of the Incan Empire? Would it have become a powerhouse? Would it have just been another colonial region where the empire started carving it up? It's an interesting question that I often find myself wondering, and I think I might make a video about it someday. That's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.